And it thinks subliminals, homie. You sitting down talking about other names, your interviews corny.
I battled a whole G-Unit Dolo.
Hold on.
All of them.
Wait.
You can put all of them.
You talking about Banks and Yayo?
All of them.
Banks and Yayo.
Song for song.
You better than Banks?
Huh?
You better than Banks?
Banks?
Yeah.
You listen to Banks right now?
When I'm in the gym, 315.
His old music?
Not now.
What he got?
He be dropping.
He got some shit right now?
Don't do that to Banks. You gonna have Banks come up here.
Something unusual has been unfolding lately in hip-hop conversations. Memphis Bleek and Jim Jones have both been speaking with the confidence of artists who believe they rank above Lloyd Banks, Tony Yayo, Fabulous Maze, and nearly everyone else from their generation. Then Bleek pushed the conversation even further by saying he could defeat both Tony Yayo and Lloyd Banks in a Razoo's battle. That is the exact moment the debate stopped being harmless talk and turned into a real controversy. Because once Lloyd Banks enters the picture, fans are never going to let those comments slide without a response. The timing only made the situation feel even bigger. Rome Streets recently released a new project through Nas' Mass Appeal label, and one collaboration immediately became the center of attention. Lloyd Banks appeared on the album, and listeners instantly started replaying his verse, wondering whether some of those slick bars were aimed at Jim Jones, Memphis Bleek, or possibly both. Nobody was mentioned directly, but hip-hop has always been built on subtle shots. Sometimes the most effective diss is the one that never says a name at all. At the same time, Memphis Bleek has been making rounds on different platforms, sounding more confident than ever. During one interview, the conversation shifted toward possible Razoo's battles, and Bleek wasted no time sharing exactly how he felt. Tony Yayo's name came up first, and he brushed it off. Then Lloyd Banks entered the discussion, and Bleek doubled down even harder. His stance was simple. Put the catalog side by side, let the songs play, and allow the records to speak. In his mind, neither matchup presented a serious challenge. What surprised many people was not simply his confidence, but how certain he sounded. He was not speaking like someone expecting a close contest. Instead, he talked as if the winner had already been decided before the first song even played. Bleek argued that too many fans focus only on lyrical ability, while forgetting what Razoo's is really about. According to him, it is not a battle of punchlines or freestyles. It is about records, moments, hit songs, and music that moves an audience. That is exactly where he believes he has the edge. Bleek even hinted that battling some of these names might almost feel one-sided, not because he questioned their talent, but because he does not view them as artists who are still actively competing at the highest level. His comments gave the impression that he believes he has continued evolving while others have been living off reputations built years ago. Naturally, that statement created immediate pushback because Lloyd Banks has quietly spent years releasing respected projects and earning praise from serious rap listeners. The discussion became even more interesting once current music entered the conversation. Bleek questioned whether fans were actually listening to Lloyd Banks' latest releases or simply praising him because of what he accomplished during his prime. He challenged people to point toward recent records and appeared convinced that many listeners were leaning on nostalgia rather than today's music. It was a bold claim, and one that immediately split opinions across the hip-hop community. Not everyone agreed with Bleek's perspective. Many argued that Lloyd Banks remains one of the sharpest lyricists in rap regardless of mainstream attention. Even if his music is not dominating commercial radio, his albums continue receiving strong respect from dedicated hip-hop fans. His mixtape catalog alone remains one of the most celebrated runs from that era. Still, Bleek refused to back away. He insisted that making great music involves much more than technical rapping ability. To him, songs should create emotion, memories, and moments that stay with listeners long after the music stops. That is where his argument shifted away from bars and toward overall feel. Bleek focused on cadence, delivery, and adapting to today's audience. He suggested that certain artists still sound exactly like they did 20 years ago, while he believes he has adjusted his style to connect with younger listeners. From his perspective, technical skill means very little if the new generation cannot relate to the presentation. That single statement created another wave of discussion online. But if you step back and really examine everything being said, something feels a little different. Both Jim Jones and Memphis Bleek have been making increasingly bold statements over the past several months. Their confidence is impossible to ignore. The bigger question is whether that confidence actually reflects reality. Fans watching these interviews cannot help but wonder whether both artists truly believe they rank above some legendary names, or whether they simply enjoy creating controversy that keeps everyone talking. For Memphis Bleek, part of that confidence may come from recent moments that reminded people of his legacy. Standing beside Jay-Z during major performances naturally reinforces your place in one of rap's greatest eras. Sharing the stage in front of massive crowds can remind both artists and fans of the important role Bleek played during Rockefeller's legendary run. When tens of thousands of people celebrate that history, it is easy to understand why someone's confidence would continue growing. The problem is that legacy alone does not automatically translate into winning a Rzoo's battle. Being connected to one of hip-hop's greatest movements is incredibly valuable, but does not guarantee victory against somebody with completely different catalog. That is exactly why Lloyd Banks presents such a difficult challenge. Banks has not survived on one moment or one era. His supporters point toward years of mixtapes, solo albums, guest appearances, and classic G-Unit records that continue finding new audiences today. Jim Jones has been making confident claims like this for a very long time. Fans have heard him compare himself to Nas. They have heard him suggest he could compete with 50 Cent. They have watched him speak confidently about Jadakiss and other New York legends. So when Memphis Bleek started making similarly bold statements about his own standing, many people felt like he was following the exact same blueprint. The only issue is that fans rarely agree with those rankings. To be fair, Tony Yayo and Lloyd Banks are completely different conversations. A Bleek versus Tony Yayo matchup could create a genuine debate because both artists have respectable catalogs filled with recognizable records. Bleek has multiple albums and several successful releases. Yayo also has records that fans still remember. That type of battle could create interesting discussion without sounding unrealistic. Lloyd Banks changes the conversation entirely. Once Banks enters the equation, you are dealing with one of the most respected lyricists from the mixtape generation. You are talking about the artist behind the hunger for more, countless legendary mixtapes, unforgettable features, and years of lyrical consistency. That is an entirely different level of competition compared to Tony Yayo. It is not even close. Another thing many artists overlook is what actually decides a Rzoo's battle. Album sales alone rarely determine the winner. Strategy matters. Song selection matters. Timing matters. Features matter. Surprise records matter. Controlling momentum matters. Fans have watched countless battles swing in the opposite direction, simply because one artist understood how to play the room better than the other. A stronger catalog means very little if the songs are not used at the right time. Jadakiss remains one of the clearest examples of that principle. Many fans still consider him the greatest Rzoo's performer we've ever seen. When the Lox faced Dipset, Jadakiss did not dominate because he had the biggest catalog. He dominated because he understood exactly when to play each record. Every response landed perfectly. Every song shifted momentum. Every move looked rehearsed. He transformed experience into his greatest weapon. That same lesson applies directly to Lloyd Banks. If Banks ever stepped into a Rzoo's battle, he would not simply rely on solo hits. He would have years of mixtape classics, unforgettable guest appearances, legendary G-Unit records, and fan-favorite deep cuts at his disposal. Suddenly, the battle stops becoming one artist versus another. It becomes an entire era of hip-hop standing behind one performer. That is where Memphis Bleek may be underestimating the challenge. There's no denying that Bleek owns records connected to one of rap's most iconic movements. Rockefeller music still carries tremendous weight today. Fans remember those songs, those moments, and everything that era represented. Bleek would absolutely enter the battle with serious ammunition. But Lloyd Banks brings a completely different kind of fan loyalty. His supporters are not only attached to commercial singles. They remember the freestyles, underground records, mixtape classics, lyrical showcases, and hidden gems that built his reputation over 2 decades. Those fans value bars, consistency, nostalgia, and lyrical excellence. They still remember records that casual listeners forgot years ago, and that type of support can completely change the energy inside of Rzoo's battle. Memphis Bleek definitely has records that can shake a crowd. The Rockefeller era produced timeless records that still get instant reactions whenever they play. The energy would be there without question. But the problem starts once Lloyd Banks begins opening his own catalog. At that point, the battle stops being about confidence and becomes a test of endurance. That is exactly why so many fans believe Bleek may be viewing this matchup very differently from the rest of the hip-hop world. Banks brings an entirely different collection of weapons into a Versus battle. The second records like On Fire, Karma, classic G-Unit anthems, legendary mixtape records, and unforgettable guest verses start dropping. The momentum can flip in seconds. That has always been the magic of Versus. One familiar instrumental is enough to transport an entire audience back to another era, and suddenly the room belongs to the other artist. Performance style also plays a major role in this conversation. Memphis Bleek naturally performs with more movement, personality, and stage energy, while Lloyd Banks has always taken a much calmer approach. Banks rarely relies on theatrics because he trusts his lyrics to carry the moment. That style has earned him respect throughout his career. Bleek's energy could absolutely help him, but excitement alone cannot erase Banks' reputation as one of the strongest lyricists of his generation. Once Banks starts digging into those legendary mixtape records and forgotten verses that hardcore fans still know line for line, Bleek would need the perfect strategy to keep pace. Every song choice would have to land at exactly the right time. Every transition would need to keep the crowd engaged, and he would probably have to surprise people with a few hidden Rockefeller gems if he wanted to keep the momentum on his side throughout the battle. That is why Bleek saying he would smoke both Tony Yayo and Lloyd Banks really sounds like two separate conversations. Tony Yayo presents one type of challenge, while Lloyd Banks represents something completely different. Yayo could absolutely make the matchup competitive, but Banks owns the type of catalog that can turn 20 rounds into a very long night for almost anyone standing across from him. Then another question started spreading through hip-hop conversations. Was Lloyd Banks quietly responding to everything being said on Rome Streets' latest album? The timing immediately caught people's attention because Jim Jones and Memphis Bleek had both been mentioning Banks repeatedly during interviews. Then Banks delivered a verse packed with slick lines that sounded personal enough for fans to begin connecting the dots on their own. What makes Banks even more dangerous is how he usually handles situations like this. He has never been the type to explain every lyric or reveal exactly who inspired a certain bar. Instead, he lets the music speak for itself. He drops the verse, allows fans to debate the meaning, and quietly moves on. Ironically, that silence often makes his lyrics hit even harder because there is never any warning before they land. Jim Jones and Memphis Bleek may insist those bars had nothing to do with them, but that has not stopped fans from breaking down every single line. Once certain names have already entered the public conversation, listeners naturally hear lyrics through a different perspective. Suddenly, an ordinary punchline feels much more direct when it perfectly matches the exact debate happening online and throughout interviews. Banks also has every reason to defend the reputation he spent decades building. He has long been recognized as one of G-Unit's strongest lyricists. So hearing people casually suggest he would be an easy Versus opponent was always going to create conversation. Whether those lyrics were direct shots or simply perfect timing, they definitely shifted some of the pressure right back onto Memphis Bleek and Jim Jones. The situation becomes even more interesting because Jim Jones already understands how unpredictable a Versus stage can be. Dipset entered that battle full of confidence, believing they had enough records to stand with anyone. Then Jadakiss completely controlled the atmosphere, and everything changed. Before the night ended, preparation, crowd control, and timing had completely overshadowed every prediction fans made beforehand. That battle became the perfect reminder that reputation alone is never enough. Execution wins battles. Song selection matters. Momentum matters. Reading the audience matters. Once Jadakiss found his rhythm, the entire room shifted in his favor, and that performance continues to be mentioned every time someone starts making huge Versus claims. Because of that history, whenever Jim Jones says he can defeat almost anybody from New York, fans immediately bring up the Dipset loss. It does not erase everything Jim has accomplished throughout his career, but it reminds people that confidence has to be backed up once the music starts playing. Talking before the battle is easy. Winning 20 rounds is an entirely different challenge. Memphis Bleek would certainly benefit from having the legendary Rockefeller catalog behind him, but even that creates another debate. How many of those unforgettable moments truly belong to Bleek himself? And how many became legendary because Jay-Z was standing beside him? That question always surfaces whenever Bleek's catalog is compared against someone like Lloyd Banks. Banks, meanwhile, has the advantage of pulling music from every chapter of his career. Solo albums, G-Unit classics, legendary mixtapes, guest appearances, underground favorites, and fan-loved deep cuts are all available. He does not have to depend on another artist creating excitement, because many of his biggest records already generate reactions on their own. That versatility makes him an extremely dangerous versus opponent. This is exactly why comparing gold plaques or album sales never tells a full story. Commercial success absolutely matters, but Versus has repeatedly shown that impact matters even more. Crowds respond to memories, emotions, and moments. Once the right beat starts playing, statistics suddenly become much less important. Banks can reach into collaborations with 50 Cent, classic G-Unit records, legendary mixtape anthems, and years of fan favorites that people still celebrate today. Bleek may have an edge when it comes to radio-friendly singles, because G-Unit often lean more towards street records. But mainstream success has never automatically guaranteed victory inside a Versus battle. Hip-hop fans already watched that exact lesson unfold when Fabulous faced Jadakiss. On paper, many believe Fab had the stronger commercial catalog, yet Jadakiss entered with a smarter strategy, better timing, and perfect execution. Rather than chasing radio records, he controlled the room from start to finish and turned one of hip-hop's biggest stages into his own showcase. That is why this conversation still feels unfinished. There is clearly more to discuss, and this story could easily develop into another chapter before everything is settled. For now, the debate belongs to the fans. Who wins these potential matchups? Memphis Bleek, Tony Yayo, or Lloyd Banks? And if Jim Jones really stepped into the ring against Banks, Maze, Jadakiss, or any of the other names he has called out over the years, who actually walks away victorious? The debate became even louder once Tony Yayo finally decided to weigh in himself. Instead of matching the aggressive energy, Yayo chose a completely different angle. He questioned how often Memphis Bleek or Jim Jones had actually headlined major tours on their own. Then he casually pointed toward his private jet travel, international performances, overseas business relationships, and lifestyle, suggesting that his success was a much stronger response than arguing on social media. Yayo also joked about Memphis Bleek continuing to appear beside Jay-Z during performances instead of leading his own shows. According to Yayo, every artist eventually reaches a point where they want to build something that stands independently. He made it clear there was no personal hatred toward Bleek, and even called him loyal. At the same time, he implied that spending an entire career standing beside another superstar is not the path he would personally choose. Even with all the interviews and jokes circulating online, Tony Yayo seemed determined not to let the situation become bigger than it needed to be. Rather than trading endless insults back and forth, he repeatedly brought the discussion back to business, lifestyle, and continuing to move forward. Whether fans agree with his approach or not, one thing is obvious. This debate has grown far beyond a single interview, and if these artists continue responding to one another, hip-hop fans could be watching the story unfold for a long time to come. The conversation didn't end with Versus or Lloyd Banks. Once Jay-Z's name entered the discussion, the entire room became even more divided. Some people argue that someone with HOV's level of influence owes the public answers from time to time, while others completely rejected that idea. One side believed fans had supported him for decades and deserved transparency. The other side felt success does not automatically require someone to explain every personal decision they make. That disagreement quickly evolved into a much bigger conversation about celebrity responsibility. One argument was that the culture helped elevate Jay-Z into one of the biggest figures hip-hop has ever seen. So naturally people are going to ask questions whenever something unexpected happens. The opposing view was much simpler. Buying albums, streaming music, or supporting an artist does not entitle anyone to private explanations. From that perspective, artists are not obligated to hold press conferences every time rumors begin circulating online. From there, the discussion shifted toward Jay-Z's overall impact on hip-hop culture. Supporters argued that H.O.V., alongside the notorious B.I.G., completely changed the way rappers spoke about wealth, ownership, business, and financial growth. Before that era, mainstream rap rarely focused on investments or corporate success the way it does today. Whether everyone agrees or not, many still believe those two legends helped redefine how money is discussed within hip-hop. Others immediately challenge that point of view. They argue that speaking about wealth and actually helping the community are two very different things. Expensive jewelry, luxury lifestyles, and millionaire success stories may inspire people, but critics question whether that automatically creates meaningful change for everyday fans. At that point, the conversation became much bigger than music. It became a debate about responsibility, influence, and what comes of becoming one of hip-hop's most powerful figures. The discussion continued expanding beyond Jay-Z himself. People began talking about how wealthy celebrities often become spokespersons for entire communities, whether they ask for that role or not. Some believe those expectations are completely unfair, while others argue that enormous influence naturally brings additional responsibility. No matter which side people stood on, it was obvious that opinions around the room were completely split. Eventually, the focus shifted back toward Jim Jones and Tony Yayo. More subtle shots started flying as both sides referenced credibility, financial success, industry relationships, and long-term accomplishments. The debate was no longer centered strictly around music. Instead of comparing catalogs, people had started comparing careers, influence, business success, and independence. By then, the original versus discussion had grown into something much larger. Tony Yayo continued approaching the conversation from a completely different angle. Rather than concentrating only on lyrical ability, he emphasized financial independence and life outside the recording booth. He questioned whether certain artists were truly standing on their own or still relying on relationships built years earlier. His message was that long-term ownership and stability carry just as much weight as hit records. That naturally brought Memphis Bleek back into the spotlight. Some people question whether Bleek's relationship with Jay-Z had always been based purely on friendship, or whether business played the bigger role throughout the years. Others dismiss that argument entirely, pointing out that nobody outside their inner circle actually knows the truth. Like so many discussions in hip-hop, speculation quickly became louder than the available facts. One thing Bleek has never hidden, however, is the amount of respect he has for Jay-Z. Throughout his career, he has consistently credited H.O.V. with providing opportunities that completely changed his life. Instead of pretending he built everything on his own, Bleek has always acknowledged the mentorship and guidance he received. To him, loyalty has never been something to apologize for. One story he shared perfectly explained the relationship between the two. After his music career slowed down, Bleek approached Jay looking for another opportunity. He was not asking for a handout or special treatment. He simply wanted another chance to work. Jay did not immediately hand him a new position. Instead, he challenged Bleek to prove that he was prepared for a different chapter beyond music. According to Bleek, Jay-Z made his expectations very clear from the beginning. If Bleek wanted to succeed in business, he would have to approach it differently than rap. Showing up late, lacking focus, or treating important meetings casually would no longer be acceptable. Jay expected discipline, professionalism, consistency, and commitment. At that point, it was less about friendship and much more about earning trust. That lesson eventually led to one of the biggest business opportunities of Bleek's career. Jay introduced him to the Dust brand and asked one straightforward question. Could he actually sell the product? Bleek never hesitated. He believed he could because he always considered himself a hustler before anything else. Whether the opportunity involved music, merchandise, or liquor, he felt confident he could make it successful. Bleek remembered grabbing the bottle almost immediately and showing it to one of his longtime associates. From there, they began throwing around marketing ideas, discussing hats, shirts, promotional campaigns, and different ways to build excitement around the brand. Long before Dust became widely recognized, they were already working behind the scenes trying to establish it as something bigger than just another liquor company. Interestingly, Bleek admitted that not every idea received instant approval. Some of their earliest concepts were rejected before eventually gaining support once everyone began seeing the larger vision. Looking back, Bleek believes many of those early brainstorming sessions helped shape branding strategies that fans later recognized. It serves as another reminder that successful ideas are often dismissed before people fully understand their potential. The interview eventually shifted into one of hip-hop's funniest old stories. Bleek laughed while recalling how people around him once convinced him that one of Nas' lyrics had been aimed directly at him. At the time, everyone insisted the line was personal, so naturally he believed it. Years later, however, he admitted he never actually received confirmation that the lyric was intended for him.